You can support In the Past Lane with a donation via Patreon or PayPal. Just go to inthepastlane.com and click on support. Thanks.
Whoa, hit the brakes. You've arrived at the #1 drive-by for American history. Welcome to The Pit Stop. Brought to you by In the Past Lane, the podcast about history and why it matters. Here's Edward T. O'Donnell, your host and historian at large.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Pit Stop, your Monday morning source for history on the go in just about 5 minutes. If you're new to the podcast, we offer this special feature every Monday, in addition to our full feature episodes. Like this week's episode on the Great Influenza Epidemic of 1918-1920 that killed nearly 700,000 Americans. Here's what happened in American history the week of November 5th, 2018. Let's start with birthdays. November 5th, 1855. That's the birthday of labor leader and social activist Eugene Debs, who was born in Terre Haute, Indiana. Debs played a key role in many of the great labor struggles from the 1890s to the 1920s. He also ran for president 5 times, mostly as candidate of the Socialist Party. Eugene Debs once said, "While there is a lower class, I am in it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free." November 5th is also the birthday of investigative journalist Ida Tarbell, who was born November 5th, 1857 in Amity Township, Pennsylvania. Ida Tarbell gained fame in the early 20th century as a muckraking journalist who took on the greatest robber baron of them all, John D. Rockefeller, exposing the misdeeds of Standard Oil. November 8th, 1897. That's the birthday of Catholic social justice activist and pacifist Dorothy Day, who was born in Brooklyn Heights, New York. Dorothy Day grew up to live among the bohemians and radicals in New York in the early 20th century. But at the age of 29, she converted to Catholicism, and she soon merged her radical devotion to the poor with Catholicism to found the Catholic worker movement in the midst of the Great Depression. Dorothy Day once said, "Don't call me a saint. I don't want to be dismissed so easily." November 9th, 1934, that's the birthday of astronomer and astrophysicist Carl Sagan, who was born in Brooklyn, New York. November 11th, 1744, First Lady Abigail Adams was born in Weymouth, Massachusetts. Abigail Adams once wrote, "If we mean to have heroes, statesmen, and philosophers, we should have learned women." Okay, what about events? November 6, 1860, Republican Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States in an election that featured 4 candidates and was dominated by the issue of slavery. 1 year later to the day, November 6, 1861, former Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis was elected President of the Confederate States of America. November 7, 1916, Jeanette Rankin of Montana became the first woman elected to the House of Representatives. In her first term in office, Rankin played an instrumental role in gaining passage of the 19th Amendment that granted women the right to vote. She also earned distinction as the only member of Congress to vote against U.S. entry into World War I. Decades later, she did it again regarding U.S. entry into World War II. November 10, 1969, the children's television show Sesame Street debuted on PBS. 49 years later, Sesame Street and its colorful residents like Big Bird, Ernie and Bert, and Elmo are still going strong. And on a side note, this episode of The Pit Stop is brought to you by the letter F and the number 4. November 11th, 1918, 100 years ago this week, the war to end all wars, what we call World War I, ended with the announcement of an armistice. And if you want to learn more about World War I, stay tuned to In the Past Lane, because the next 2 full feature episodes take a close look at World War I and its aftermath. Okay, time for the last word. Let's give it to Carl Sagan, who was born this week. Way back in 1990, when the spacecraft Voyager was about 4 billion miles from Earth, Carl Sagan suggested that technicians turn around its camera and take a photograph of the Earth. That photograph shows the Earth as though it's a small blue dot, really like a speck of dust, suspended in a beam of light. In response, this is what Carl Sagan wrote about that photograph. It's a little longer than our usual last word, but it's worth reading to the end. "Look at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you have ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, Every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species live there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that, in glory and triumph, they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely indistinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings. How eager they are to kill one another. How fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Okay, people, that's your history fix for the week. Now put it in drive and go make your own history.